Here is your Africa True Story. How the West is taking over Africa's mines and natural resources in the new scramble for Africa. Sovereignty was a key axis of anti-colonial struggles and early post-independent politics, especially over each country's own resources, which had been plundered by the global North under colonialism. Today, after the early post-independent projects have been derailed by neoliberalism dynamics similar to colonialism persists, with Africa's natural resources being siphoned off by the global North and African economies left economically dependent on primary commodity export. Prior to colonialism, the countries of Africa were economically, politically, and sociologically structured organically around their internal needs and demands, meeting internal materials and social challenges. This is not to say these societies were devoid of internal contradictions, conflict between them, or engagement with the wider world. Indeed, trade routes certainly extended beyond the continent. But on the whole, the economic structure and relationships that developed were shaped by dynamics and demands within African societies. This was forcefully upended with the onset of colonialism as Africa's economies were extroverted, destroyed, and fragmented. A new structure was put in place in which African economies were interested in the global economic order as providers of raw materials for the development of other countries, basically for Imperial Europe. This has relegated the vast majority of the continent to a politically economical structure of primary commodity export dependence. With this structure, African countries became dependent on the export of small basket of barely processed minerals, timber, and agricultural products, including cocoa, coffee, bananas, and etc., as raw materials to feed the industries of the global North. In return, Africa became dependent for their consumption needs of the imports of the goods manufactured in the North, most often made using African raw materials. This enforced an equal exchange of unprocessed so-called low-value raw materials for high-value processed goods has become the basic mechanism of an equal economic relationship between Africa and the advanced industrial capitalist North, and the means of continued appropriation of the wealth created in Africa by the North. This undermines the accumulation of wealth in Africa and its reinvestments for renewing, upgrading, and expanding productive capabilities of the society on the continent, and therefore of the ability to meet the changing needs of the people. On the contrary, African countries and opportunities for their people have become trapped in misfortune, having little control of commodities in the global market from which the raw materials come from. Beneath the surface of Africa lies a wealth of mineral resources of enormous value. In 2019, the continent produced 1 billion tons of minerals worth $406 billion according to the United Nations. Africa is also home to about 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 12% of the world's oil, and 8% of the world's natural gas reserves. The continent also holds 40% of the world's gold and up to 90% of its chromium and platinum, both valuable metals. Today, Western companies control Africa's key mineral resources, notably gold, platinum, diamond, copper, oil, gas, and coal. Research shows that more than 171 Western companies have mining operations in 37 sub-Saharan African countries. They collectively control over $1 trillion worth of Africa's most valuable resources. Western governments have used their powers and influence to make sure mining companies have access to Africa's raw materials. This was the case during the colonial period and is the case till today. Under the guise of helping Africa in its economic development, a mere continuation of the colonial paternal narrative, 134 billion reportedly flows into the continent each year in the form of loans, foreign investments, and aid. But at the same time, an estimated $192 billion is extracted from Africa, mainly in the form of profits by foreign companies, tax dodging, and the cost of adapting to climate change. In short, the continent is a net creditor to the rest of the world to the tune of as much as $58 billion a year. The current phase of the scramble for African resources is a clear continuation of the post-independent African exploitation. Then as now, access to raw material is a major factor, often the major factor in the Western foreign policy towards the continent. Today's Africa's natural resource wealth is being appropriated by foreign, private interests whose operations are leaving a devastating trail of social, environmental, and human rights abuses in their wake. In response, communities affected by mining in sub-Saharan Africa are calling for mining revenues to stay in the country where they are mined, for raw materials to be processed in the country where they are mined, thereby adding value, and for governments to act to protect people affected by mining rather than protecting the profit margins of corporations exploiting them. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching.